I never believed in haunted houses. I grew up on horror movies, ghost stories, and all those true paranormal documentaries, and I always laughed them off as nonsense. Stories people told themselves to explain the unexplainable. Shadows were just tricks of the light. Noises were just pipes. And ghosts? Just stories for children and YouTube channels. That's why I bought the house on Mill Creek Road without hesitation. It was old. Sure, built in 1893 according to the property listing, but I had always loved older homes. They had character. And this one was ridiculously cheap. It was the kind of place people whispered about in town. Too many owners, too many quick sales, too many bad vibes. But I didn't believe in that crap. I saw a bargain. I signed the papers in late September and moved in alone a week later. My plan was to restore the place little by little. The floors creaked, the wallpaper peeled, and the attic smelled like something had died there 30 years ago. But it was mine. My first house. My fresh start. The first few nights were uneventful. The place groaned and sighed like old houses do, and sometimes I'd hear the wind whistle through the cracked window panes. It wasn't scary, just atmospheric. I even joked to my friends that it felt haunted, though I never meant it. Then, about 5 days after I moved in, I heard the first noise. It was around 2:30 a.m. I was lying awake, scrolling through my phone when a faint tapping echoed through the floor beneath my bed. 3 sharp taps and deliberate, spaced evenly apart. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. The screen's glow suddenly too bright against the darkness. I listened, holding my breath. The sound didn't come again. After a minute, I laughed it off. Probably the house settling, I told myself. Maybe a branch against the siding, but the next night it happened again. Same time, same number of taps, tap, tap, tap. This time I got out of bed and pressed my ear to the floorboards. Nothing. I checked the basement, half expecting to find a raccoon or a nest of rats. It was empty. Dusty, cold, silent. For the next week, the tapping continued, always between 2 and 3 a.m., always from the same spot beneath my bed. And it wasn't just tapping anymore. Sometimes it was scratching, like long fingernails dragging across the wood. Sometimes it was a low, rhythmic thud as if someone were knocking from below. By the second week, I couldn't sleep. I told myself I was being paranoid. Old houses make noises. I was just noticing them because I lived alone now. But then the whispers started. I woke one night to the sound of faint murmuring beneath the floor. It was so soft I thought I was dreaming, a hushed voice just out of earshot. I knelt down and pressed my ear against the boards. Let us out. I jerked back, my heart hammering. The whisper had been clear, hoarse, desperate, and far too human. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, that my exhausted brain was conjuring sounds from the hum of the pipes. But deep down I knew what I'd heard. Over the next several nights the voice came back. Sometimes it was one voice, sometimes 2 or 3, overlapping in frantic whispers. I could never make out the words, but I could feel the emotion in them. Sorrow, anger, hunger. I started sleeping on the couch. The living room was quieter, but not for long. One night, while half asleep, I heard the unmistakable creak of floorboards. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing beneath me. I knew the basement was directly below, but the sound wasn't coming from the stairs. It was coming from under the floor. I grabbed a flashlight and went down to the basement. The air was damp and cold, heavy with the smell of rot. My breath fogged in the beam of the light. Everything looked normal, until I noticed the far wall. There near the floor was a square outline I hadn't seen before. It looked like a panel of wood set into the wall. My heart pounded as I knelt and ran my fingers along the edges. It shifted slightly under my touch. A hidden door. I hesitated for a long moment. Every instinct told me to leave it alone. But I had to know. I pried it open. The smell hit me first, a rancid, sour stench that clawed its way into my lungs. Behind the panel was a narrow crawl space, barely tall enough for me to crouch in. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing something that made my blood run cold. Scratches. Hundreds of them. Deep gouges etched into the dirt walls and wooden beams. Some looked like fingernails. Others like they'd been carved with a knife. And there, scattered among the debris, were bones. Small ones, human. I stumbled backward, gasping for air, my mind racing. What the hell had happened here? Who were they? And why were they still here? I sealed the panel and tried to forget. I told myself it was old, maybe the site of some forgotten tragedy from a century ago. But the voices didn't stop. If anything, they grew bolder, louder, closer. One night they said my name. I woke with a start, drenched in sweat. The whisper slithered through the darkness, curling beneath the floorboards. Daniel. I stumbled out of bed, shouting into the void, begging for it to stop. But the whisper only laughed, a hollow, rasping chuckle that shook me to my core. I stopped going into the basement after that. I stopped sleeping in my bed. I stopped sleeping at all. And then came the night that changed everything. It was early November. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. I sat awake in the living room, lights blazing, TV on full volume, anything to drown out the whispers. But the sound still came, tap, tap, tap. I turned off the TV. The tapping grew louder, frantic, hammering against the floor. Then the scratching started, and violent, desperate, like someone trying to claw their way out. And then, with a splintering crack, the floorboards buckled. I screamed as the wood split apart and a hand burst through, pale, skeletal, nails worn down to jagged stubs. It grasped blindly at the air, clawing for freedom. Then another hand, and another. I backed away, trembling as shapes began to pull themselves from the crawl space below. Not whole bodies, but fragments. Twisted limbs, hollow-eyed faces, mouths frozen in silent screams. They dragged themselves up inch by inch, whispering in unison, "Let us out. Let us out." I don't remember running. I don't remember how I got to my car. I only remember the cold, the rain, the sound of my tires skidding on wet asphalt as I sped away. I never went back. I sold the house, sight unseen, for a fraction of what I paid. I didn't care. I just wanted it gone, but sometimes late at night, when the world is silent and still, I swear I can hear it again. Tap. Tap, tap beneath my bed, beneath the floor. Calling my name. A few months after I sold the house, a contractor contacted me. He'd been hired by the new owners to renovate the basement. While digging beneath the floor, they found a hidden chamber, a sealed room containing at least 12 human remains. The police believe the house once belonged to a man named Dr. Matthew Crane, a surgeon who vanished in 1902 after being accused of murdering several vagrants and squatters who sought shelter on his property. The case was never solved. The bodies were never found, until now. They told me the skeletons were arranged in a circle, their fingernails worn down from trying to claw their way out. And carved into the wood above them, scratched into the boards with their last strength, was a single word: below. I used to think silence was peaceful. I grew up in a loud city. Sirens, traffic, arguments spilling from open windows. And when I finally got the chance to move out to the countryside, silence was the one thing I craved most. I wanted to hear the wind, the crickets, the quiet hum of nature. And for a while, that's exactly what I got. But silence. Silence has a way of revealing what the noise hides. It started 2 years ago, when I signed a lease for a small, 2-story farmhouse on the edge of a nowhere town called Pine Hollow. It was old but beautiful. Hardwood floors, antique fixtures, a sprawling backyard that sloped into a line of dense forest. It needed work, sure, but the rent was laughably cheap. The landlord, an elderly man named Conrad, was upfront about the one quirk of the house. "There's a sealed-off crawl space under the parlor," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Some kind of storage area from when the place was built. It's inaccessible, so don't worry about it." I didn't. At least, not then. The first few weeks were blissful. Quiet mornings with coffee on the porch, long afternoons reading by the bay window. At night I slept like a rock. No honking horns, no drunken yelling, no distant police sirens. Then, about a month in, I started hearing the noises. It was late, past 1 a.m., and I was awake in bed scrolling through my phone when a faint thump echoed from downstairs. My first thought was that a tree branch had fallen on the roof. Then came another thump and another, a slow rhythmic banging. I grabbed a flashlight and crept down to the parlor. The sound was coming from beneath the floor. Thump, thump, thump. I knelt, pressing my ear to the wood. The thumping stopped. Silence. I told myself it was probably a pipe or the house settling. The place was more than 100 years old after all. I went back to bed and didn't think much of it. Until the next night. Same time. Same sound. This time it wasn't just banging. There was scratching too. Long, slow drags across the wood like fingernails tracing the underside of the floorboards. And underneath it all, barely audible, something else. A voice. At first I thought I was imagining it, but when I held my breath and listened closely, I heard it again, a muffled, rhythmic whisper. Too quiet to understand, but definitely words. I didn't sleep at all that night. The following morning I called Conrad. He brushed it off immediately. "Old house," he said. "Probably raccoons or possums under there. Nothing to worry about." But there was no way animals were making those sounds. Animals didn't speak. Over the next week, the noises became a nightly ritual. Always around 1 a.m. Always beneath the same part of the parlor floor. The banging grew louder, the scratching more frantic. And the whispers, they were no longer whispers. They were sentences. Words I could almost understand. Help. Cold. Still here. I was terrified, but also, God help me, curious. I called a contractor and asked if there was any way to access the sealed crawl space. He laughed and said it wasn't worth the trouble. If it's sealed for a reason, he told me. I wish I had listened. Instead, I decided to open it myself. I started by pulling up the carpet in the parlor. Beneath it was a trapdoor I'd never noticed before, a small square panel nailed shut with old rusted hardware. My hands shook as I pried it open. The hinges groaned, dust billowed, and a rush of cold, stale air poured out. The space beneath was pitch black. The beam of my flashlight barely pierced the darkness. I lowered myself down, heart hammering, knees trembling as they touched dirt. The smell hit me first, damp, earthy, and sour, like something long dead. The crawl space was about 3 feet high, cramped and suffocating, and carved into the wooden beams above me were dozens of deep gouges, claw marks. I shined the light around and froze. There was furniture down there, a small wooden chair, a metal bed frame with rotting fabric, a tin plate and spoon. It looked like someone had lived there, or been kept there, and then I saw the writing, words carved into the wall in jagged letters. "Please don't leave me here." I scrambled out of the crawl space, slamming the hatch shut and nailing it closed again. My heart was pounding, my skin crawling. It wasn't animals. Someone had been living under my floor, or dying there. That night the noises were worse than ever. The banging shook the walls. The whispers were screams. "Help us! Still here! Let us out!" I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of the room with the lights on, clutching a kitchen knife, listening to the horror beneath my feet. The next morning I drove to the town library and spent the day combing through old newspaper archives. I found the story almost immediately. In 1968, a man named Raymond Goss had owned the house. He was a quiet, unassuming man, until neighbors noticed strange smells and called the police. When they searched the property, they discovered the bodies of 3 women beneath the floorboards. They had been kidnapped, imprisoned, and left to die in the crawl space. The case made national news. Goss was executed in 1972. The house remained empty for nearly 20 years. I was too horrified to go home. I considered breaking my lease and leaving that day, but part of me, some sick, desperate part, wanted answers. That night, I stayed awake on the parlor floor, listening. The voices came again. But this time, they said something new. "He's coming." My blood ran cold. "Who?" I whispered before I could stop myself. There was silence. Then, faintly, "The man. He's coming." I left every light on in the house that night. I locked the doors, the windows, even the cellar door. I sat with my back to the wall, kitchen knife still clutched in my hand. At 1:13 a.m. I heard footsteps in the hall. They were slow, heavy, not the frantic scurrying of animals or the creaks of an old house, deliberate footsteps. Someone was inside. I crept to the doorway, heart pounding. The hall was empty. Then the footsteps moved again, from the ceiling, above me, in the attic. I climbed the stairs, each creak of the wood louder than the last. The air grew colder, heavier, the silence pressing against my ears. I pushed open the attic door. Nothing, just dust and cobwebs. I turned to leave and froze. A man stood in the corner. He was tall, skeletal, his face pale and hollow, his eyes black as coal. He was dressed in filthy, tattered clothes from another era, and he was smiling. "You shouldn't have opened it," he rasped. I stumbled backward, my breath catching. "Who are you?" I whispered. He tilted his head, smile widening. "I never left." I bolted down the stairs, tripping over myself, slamming the attic door behind me. But when I reached the parlor, he was already there, standing over the trapdoor. The wood beneath his feet began to splinter, cracking and breaking as dozens of pale hands erupted from below. Skeletal fingers clawed the air, grasping, reaching. And the whispers, God, the whispers rose into a deafening chorus. "Let us out. Don't leave us here. Stay with us." The last thing I remember was falling, the floor giving way beneath me, the world swallowing me whole. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. A neighbor had called 911 after hearing screams. The paramedics found me unconscious on the parlor floor, surrounded by broken boards. But the crawl space was empty. No furniture, no carvings, no bodies. Nothing. The police said I must have fallen through rotten wood and hit my head. They said the trauma probably caused hallucinations. But they're wrong. I can still hear them. Even now, in my new apartment, miles away from that cursed house. Late at night when the world is silent, I hear them beneath the floor. Thump, 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 and the whisper, "He's coming." 2 weeks ago, I received a package in the mail, no return address. Inside was a rusted tin plate, the same kind I'd seen in the crawl space, and a folded scrap of yellowed paper. 4 words carved deep into the surface, "Please don't leave me." I used to work as a property inspector for a small real estate company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and kept me busy. Most of the time, my job was simple. Walk through old houses, take pictures, note down structural issues, and report back to the office. 99% of the time, it was boring. Drafty windows, mold, termites. Nothing a little renovation couldn't fix. But then came the house on Ashford Lane. It wasn't just any listing. It was a Victorian mansion built in 1887, massive and decaying with gables that jutted like jagged teeth against the sky. It had been abandoned for over 30 years, and the company had just purchased it for a renovation project. My boss wanted me to do a full interior survey before the contractors moved in. "Be thorough," he told me. "We're planning to gut the whole place, so document everything." I drove out there on a gray October morning, the kind where the air feels heavy and the clouds press down on the earth. The house sat at the end of a long gravel road, hidden behind overgrown trees and ivy. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I felt it, that heavy, oppressive presence, the kind that sits at the back of your neck and makes you feel watched. The front door groaned as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the hollow halls. Inside, the air was thick with dust and rot. Wallpaper hung in long, curling strips. Floorboard sagged beneath my weight, but it wasn't the decay that unsettled me. It was the silence. Old houses usually have sounds, creaks, drafts, maybe a rat or two. But this house, it was deadly silent. I started my walkthrough, snapping photos and jotting down notes. Living room, collapsed ceiling. Kitchen, water damage. Library, broken windows. Everything was standard until I reached the second floor. That's where I found room 13. It wasn't on the blueprints. In fact, it shouldn't have existed. The hallway had 12 doors, 6 on each side, and at the very end was a blank stretch of wall. But when I tapped on it, it sounded hollow. A false wall. Curiosity got the better of me. I pried at the edges with a crowbar, and after a few minutes the plaster gave way, revealing a narrow wooden door hidden beneath. The number 13 was carved into it by hand, rough and uneven. The knob turned easily. The door creaked open. The room was small, raw, barely large enough for a single bed and a chair, and pitch black. The walls were bare wood, scarred with deep gouges. The floor was covered in dust and something else. Something darker. It looked like dried blood, and then I noticed the floorboards. They were uneven, slightly raised, as if something beneath them was pushing upward, and from somewhere below came the faintest sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was so faint I thought I'd imagined it. I knelt and pressed my ear to the floor. The tapping grew louder, more frantic, and then a whisper. "Is someone there?" I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. The voice was small, fragile. A woman's voice. "Please," it whispered again. "Don't leave me!" I ran. I slammed the door, grabbed my gear, and bolted out of the house without finishing the inspection. I didn't even lock up. Back at the office, I tried to explain it to my boss, but the words sounded insane coming out of my mouth. Voices under the floor? In a hidden room? He laughed it off. "Probably some animal," he said. "Or a squatter. Go back tomorrow and finish the job." I didn't want to. God knows I didn't. But it was my job and I needed the money. So the next morning I went back. The house felt different this time. Colder. Heavier. The silence had teeth. Every step I took echoed too loudly. My flashlight beam trembled in my hand. I went straight to room 13. The door was open. I was sure, absolutely sure, I had closed it. Inside, the air felt damp, almost humid, like someone had been breathing in there. The dust I'd seen yesterday was disturbed. There were footprints, bare feet, leading toward the corner of the room and vanishing into the floorboards. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Please, help me." I swallowed hard, steeling myself, and pried up one of the loose boards. Beneath it was darkness, a narrow crawl space that extended deep under the house. The smell hit me like a fist, decay and iron and something old. I lowered my flashlight into the hole. Something moved. At first I thought it was a rat, but then a pale hand shot out of the darkness, gripping the edge of the floor with skeletal fingers. Another hand followed, and then, slowly, agonizingly, a figure began to crawl upward. It was a woman, or what was left of one. Her skin was gray and mottled, stretched too tightly over bone. Her eyes were wide and unblinking. Her hair hung in filthy clumps, and her mouth, God, her mouth, and was open in a permanent scream. She reached for me. "Don't leave me," she rasped, her voice raw and desperate. "Please, don't leave me." I screamed and stumbled backward, slamming the door and running down the hall. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air, my hands shaking. I called the police. They searched the house but found nothing. No hidden room. No crawl space, no body. They told me I must have hallucinated it. Maybe mold spores, maybe stress, maybe too many horror movies. But room 13 was real. I knew it. I quit my job a week later. I couldn't set foot in another house without thinking of that voice, those eyes. I tried to forget, to convince myself it hadn't happened. But then the nightmares started. Every night I dreamt of room 13. I dreamt of the woman crawling toward me, whispering my name. And every morning I woke up to the same sound, tap, tap, tap. At first I thought it was in my head, but the tapping grew louder, closer. And then the whispers followed. "Please, don't leave me." Down here, I tore apart my apartment looking for the source. Nothing. I moved to a new place. The sounds followed me. I started hearing them at work, in my car, in the middle of the street. The final straw came last month. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. The tapping was louder than ever when under my bed. I knelt down and pressed my ear to the floor. Room 13. The voice hissed. My blood ran cold. I hadn't spoken those words aloud since the day I left that house. I ripped up the carpet. I tore up the boards. And beneath them, in the dark space between the floor and the ceiling below, I saw it. Carved into the wood in jagged, frantic letters. "Please don't leave me." I moved again the next day. I burned everything I owned. But it didn't matter. The whisper follows me wherever I go. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and I'm sure I'm alone, I hear the tapping start beneath the floorboards. And then the voice. "Please, help me. Room 13. 3 weeks ago I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was an old rusted key wrapped in a strip of faded wallpaper. The same pattern from the walls of room 13. There was a note, scrawled in frantic handwriting. You left the door open. I haven't slept since. And sometimes late at night when the world goes silent, I swear I hear footsteps coming from underneath me. They're getting closer, and this time, I don't think she wants help.